All right, let's get started with our first guest. It's such an honor to have him back. Jeff Harman, a second-generation astrologer, is got 40 years of experience. He's a master of classic, Vedic, and Kabbalistic astrology. He also draws from many other traditions of spiritual knowledge for clearing people and property of unwanted energies. He specializes in electional astrology, the art of selecting auspicious times to sign contracts, release products, travel, and scheduled weddings, surgery, and other important events. Jeff owns a production company and is familiar with all aspects of the entertainment industry. His resume reads on and on and on, but we're going to hear that right from Jeff. He's currently based back in Los Angeles. You can check out his website at www.jeffharman.com. Without any further delay, let's get him on. Jeff, good evening. Welcome to AM 630 and the Fringe Radio Show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
Oh, I'll tell you, it seemed, I don't remember exactly when you were on the last time. It seems just like yesterday, but I know it's well over a year ago. Time just flies, Jeff.
That it does. Time waits for no one.
That's true. That's very true. Anyway, again, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. For our listeners that did not tune into the last interview that we had, what if you give us a little bit of backstory? How did you get into doing what you do? And again, you're involved with you've spoken for MUFON and all kinds of different organizations. Been involved with radio and television. Such an interesting career, an interesting life. I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about it.
Well, it all started for me back in the mid-'70s. My mother was an astrologer. She was actually a nurse and a nurse practitioner near the end of her career. And she started as an LPN, then went to an RN. And in the 60s, I saw a lot of different books sitting around. Some of them were medical astrology because she was always interested in that stuff, and I didn't think too much of it. Mm-hmm. But when the girlfriends started coming around in the 70s, she began to tell me things that were so accurate. I'm like, well, this isn't mother's intuition. I want to know what you're doing here. So we started conversing about it, and she started to teach it to me. And of course, then that was BC, before computers. That was actually before digital clocks. In fact, digital clocks were just coming around right then.
Or those clocks, Jeff, with the cubes that look digital, but they just turned.
Yeah, right. Those two. That's right. I remember those. Yeah. And what happened was I was actually pretty skeptical at first because I thought, come on, how can this really work? And the more I got into it, the more I was really astonished that it really did work. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people. They're very skeptical of it. I think the religions have said it's, not appropriate to do. There's all kinds of attacks against it. But the more I got into it, the more I went, there's really something going on here. And then in the early 80s is when I started bumping into some of the older stuff, particularly the medieval and by the late 80s, the Vedantic, which is also known as Jyotish astrology. And it's really amazing. I mean, I had a studio, and I was always curious why certain people would exhibit traits that they did, and others just exhibited what they did. And it really shows up in the chart. The thing I enjoy the most about it is probably the last 20 years. I actually have always tried to get away from it, but it's always chased me, and I've had so many clients. I mean, there's literally thousands of clients all over the world. And what's heartwarming to me is when someone comes back and says, I was in a tough time, and you helped me, and it gave me insight, it gave me direction, it gave me hope that, this wasn't going to continue. Because astrology is amazing with cycles. Even in my own life, I'm just astounded. That's what convinced me of it, was, I went, wait a minute, this is so accurate, it's creepy. It's like, right. There's no way this could be. A lot of people think it's predicting the future. It's actually not. What it is it's predicting the energies that are coming at you. And the ancient philosophies are so much different than the modern ones. Like everyone says, you're your sun sign. And Vedic astrology and the older disciplines never said you were your astrology. They said you're experiencing it, which gives you a lot more empowerment than just being at the effect of everything.
For those that don't understand astrology, now, of course, it's to be an astrologist, there's a I would say not only an art to it, but there's a science to it. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, and then you've got to connect everything together. Is that correct? I mean, it's
yes. In fact, I like what you just said. It's a science, because that, I would say, is really clearly the difference between a lot of modern astrology. Not that some modern astrology isn't very geometrical, mathematical, and scientific, but the ancient stuff was astronomy, really hardcore astronomy, scientifically applied to practical reality. That's the difference right there. And boy, I don't know if the air was cleaner or the food was better, and I think both was the case. But man, there were some smart people back then.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, again, putting it again, it's a science, and it's a very complex science too. I mean, it is. Of course, some people can understand it, but I mean, when you try to, and I believe the last time you were on the program, we talked about it. Is there, when you're, I don't want to say when you're judging astrologers, but if you're comparing astrologers or people that practice it, there's the people that can kind of maybe get you on the planet, the ones that can get you to the country, the ones that can get you, into the ballpark, and then there's the ones like yourself that can get you into the seat of the ballpark. There's a huge range there.
Yeah, there is, and I would have to say that some of it, I call some of the stuff today love, light, and cluelessness. It's a little airy-fairy. I think one of the most powerful tools that really got me interested was the interrogation astrology. In India, they know it as prashna. Most people in the ancient times didn't have their birth time. In fact, we have people born in the last century, they don't have their birth time, and it still happens, where it's not recorded, or maybe someone was born as an orphan or what have you and don't have access to their birth records or their parents. And one of the most powerful tools was just, and this is something I use every single day, asking or inquiring about something. You don't need your birth chart. You literally say, is it in my best interest to do X? And I get it all the time. Pursue this business partnership. Pursue this investment, pursue this relationship, pursue buying this house. And it's amazing how accurate it is. It's literally based at the moment you pose the question, which in my opinion proves the universe is an interactive consciousness. Mm-hmm. It's not just we're not at the effect of the stars, though I think they affect us, but we're literally interacting with this.
And you have to understand it, and of course, just like anything, Jeff, that somebody wants to master the tasks at hand, it's a lot of effort and work. It's not something that
it never ends.
Right, it never ends.
It never ends.
And I'm sure there's people like yourself who are gifted to understand it. I believe, just like with anything, I believe that musicians are gifted to create music, and mathematicians are there for for math and what have you. But if you've got the gifts in hand, to not take advantage of it is just a waste.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing. There's an old saying: sometimes what you don't aspire to do often comes to you, even when you don't think it's right for you. And I've always, looked at, do I really want to do this? And yet it keeps chasing me year after year after year. And people are always wanting readings. And again, it's heartwarming to hear someone say, it really helped me. It really gave me direction. It saved me a lot of money, or it helped me do whatever it did. And that's fantastic.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. Being in LA and with all the different work that you do, with audio engineering, all these different things, being in the entertainment industry, do a lot of the egos get in the way? I mean, when you have people in that, I consider musicians and actors and artists. I mean, again, it's a talent. I don't believe. I was given the talent, I call it a God-given gift, whether, how people look at it is something, but music came very, very easy to me. At the age of 4, I started to study organ, and I was a professional organist for a while. It took me in many different directions. Now, the little bit of time I have left, I just play for I do it for my own enjoyment. But again, it's a gift. When you work with people in Hollywood, whether they're musicians or actors, do egos get in the way sometime when they want help?
Well, you mean in terms of working in astrology?
Yeah, I mean, when they come to you for help, do you have to deal with that? The artistic person, the eccentric person. Does that sometimes cause a problem, or when people come to you for help, is that something that doesn't even stand in the way?
Well, it's something I try and remove myself to. I really keep removed. I think one of the things today that is so unique is nobody ever comes to my office anymore, and the reason why, the internet. The internet is such an amazing toy or tool, because what happens is every reading I do, and I have clients all over the world, they literally call me, they log into my computer, I just email them a code, they're right into my computer. If they drove here, it would be, I have people sitting in the airport in Europe and all over the place where they're logging right into their iPhones or their Androids, and they're looking at the session right there instantly, and they're hearing me, and I'm recording the phone line. In fact, there's even new software you can record the session and make a movie of it right on your iPhone. Wow. So it's amazing. It's changed so much in the last decade, and it's going to continue to change. So, no, I really don't have a problem with anyone's ego. I think that's another thing that this type of work, a lot of people say I'm doing astrology, but really what I'm doing is looking at a deep karmic psychological energy that's affecting all of us. And you get a lot more compassion for people when you see that everybody's on their own journey. Everybody has their own perception of reality. Everyone's experiencing it differently. And I really I have a lot of clients who are psychologists and psychiatrists, and it's really fun to delve into the depths of what the cycles of astrology offers. And what I always like to do with people is tell them how to change it. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful things about Vedic astrology is it really didn't look at the astrology as something you had to experience, but it was something more that you were experiencing, and you could choose how to react to it more appropriately. It's, I would liken astrology almost to the weather. Mm-hmm. You're affected by it without question.
Right.
I don't care what time of year it is, you're affected by the temperatures, you're affected by the rains, you're affected by all of it. But when you know it or you're aware of it, you adjust to the season. You know when it's wintertime, you wear a coat, right? You know when it's raining, you see, and that's where astrology is very analogous, where if you know when you're up kind of ready to surf a wave and it's really looking good, and if you didn't know it, you wouldn't surf it as well. So what I love is the timing that it gives people. Many times I've had people, speaking of entertainers, where it's funny to hear someone sitting in the chair crying that their personal life is a train wreck when they just made $20 million on a movie. To most of us, we go, well, geez, what's wrong? What could be wrong? But, there again, it proves reality is different for all of us. Some people don't have money problems. Some people have relationship problems. Right. And it's really interesting to see the diversity of experience through astrology. It's absolutely mind-boggling. What seems trivial to you or I or someone else might be absolutely the most important thing in the world to another individual. And what's, I think, unique is astrology really shows that. And you can help people to understand that this is a phase you're going through. And when I think a lot of people really get amazed when they can see on their computer screen and go, oh my God, that's exactly when this energy started happening in my life. And then I can point over here with the cursor and say, well, right over here is probably when it's going to end. And that's like the control tower airline, radioing the pilot in an airline and saying, you've got certain weather conditions in front of you, but they're only going to exist for this amount of time or distance. Well, that gives you a lot of ammunition. If it's sheer winds, well, don't break out the hot boiling coffee.
Right.
It might get all over everybody. Keep the seatbelts fastened. So there's a lot of wonderful tools like that. And I also find people can grab periods of spiritual growth in a much deeper, more profound way when they understand the energies that are going on to them. I love to tell the story. I had a psychiatrist once who came to me, and he had just moved with his family from a particular place in the country to another place. Well, this particular location was really challenging. Location astrology is amazing. This person moved right on a moon-Pluto line. And that, plain English on that one, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard. And he said to me, he says, my colleagues are prescribing medications for me. I can't take it. I'm losing my mind. And I said, well, let me show you the textbook description of where you just moved. And once he saw the exact latitude and coordinates that I was talking about, which happened to be pretty much running down the center of his forehead, he went, oh, my God, this is exactly what it's been like. And I said, but you now know it's not you. You now know it's an energy you're experiencing, and you have the power of reaction. It's like martial arts. Once you know something's there, you change. It's like driving down a sheer ice road. You either elect not to go on it, or if you do, you put chains on.
Right.
You see, so you operate much differently when you have knowledge and awareness of what it was. And he actually threw the medication in the garbage can and said, I can deal with this, because he had already bought a house and a practice and all that. And I think it was a major cathartic lesson in emotional reaction to things. It doesn't take it away, but it changes the way you react, and therein is the power.
Right. No, I can appreciate that, and I think people, where they really see the benefit of it, and anybody in that case, Jeff, when you got a roadmap, when you know what's ahead, like you said, you can adjust for it. It's when you're going into the darkness or the wilderness, or the you don't know.
Right.
Well, of course, now everything is new. There's unknowns that are coming at you. I mean, there can even be unknowns when you do know.
Oh, yeah.
But you know enough
Absolutely.
to anticipate the unknowns.
Well, speaking of paranormal, I've had so many clients who've had everything from ghosts or, spiritual attacks, abductions, or many different phenomena. Some of it they explain different ways. One person will say, I got abducted. The other one will say, well, I got spiritually attacked. Both could be correct. And interestingly enough, I have done a lot of research in this. I actually had a director of one of the MUFON in Arizona say to me, can we do a study on a bunch of paranormal phenomena? And I did. I undertook a bunch of different things and seeing what we could see. And it was really interesting. And this is a theme that I have found consistent. People who tend to have hard aspects with Saturn in the 12th house, or they can have other certain transits and progressions going on, will exhibit a lot of paranormal interaction. And the interesting thing is there's ways to stop it through spiritual methods. I actually use things out of Scripture, believe it or not. In fact, there's a very ancient science called Tamira. There's another one called Notricon, which is very powerful. One of the things that we've lost with the Western world translating all the Aramaic and Hebrew into Latin, English, and all these other languages, you can't take a cryptographic language and now stick it into another language and hold the cryptology. It doesn't work, because now you're doing a translation. But when you go back to that original Hebrew and Aramaic, there is Scripture, like the Psalms and many portions of the Bible, that are actually coded. And I'm always amazed that I never hear this on any of the specials that are run on the networks about the Bible. And yet, I'm not making this up. I didn't invent it. It's been there for thousands of years. And you can't make this stuff up. And what we found is that paranormal phenomena reduces or sometimes completely goes away when we place And I've had people in remote viewing. I've had people in some serious situations, possession. I've had parents they felt their child was possessed. We've had other conditions where people thought that they had stuff on them, and they did, and the astrology indicated they did. But then I was able to find a method to clear it and hold it. And a lot of this is the techniques that I use, is some of the cryptology or ciphers that are actually in the scriptures.
Interesting.
It's amazing stuff. And some people call them magic squares, but they're really angelic squares is what they are.
In some of the notes that Camille sent me as far as talking points, and that's without a doubt such an interesting subject, is paranormal research.
Oh, it's huge.
It is, and one thing I always throw out there is people that are involved with it are so dedicated. I don't ever use the term hobby, because it's not. It's such a powerful, so emotional. I've had the honor to interview a lot of paranormal researchers, and of course you take the Hollywood and stuff out of it, but they do want to help others, and it's amazing when you read through case after case after case after case, how much stuff is out there, Jeff, that we have no clue, that we have no understanding. But it sounds like with the gift that you have, everything, there's a grid. It all falls into something, and if it can be defined, people can then either, maybe not the word combat it, but adjust to it, stay away from it, or at least understand it.
Some people can't combat it. They actually need outside help. Like, for instance, there are some people who have disincarnate souls attached to them, which we would call them dead people. Hard science would argue that anyone continues, atheists will contend, how could there be anything after this body? My real personal experience is anyone who thinks that consciousness is working completely only by the gray matter in the brain, I think is not researching the facts.
Right.
Localized human consciousness definitely transcends the body. In fact, we get into astral travel. This is where the realm of ghosts come in, also known as disincarnate souls. And there's been a tremendous amount of science that has supported that, as well as evidence. And I have found that's where the Egyptian and the Nadi astrology, which is spelled N-A-D-I, it's an astrology that's a very old science out of India, out of southern India, primarily. And it really looks at us as spiritual beings having this physical experience. And what I think is so fascinating is you can actually see, like I think what really gets people is when I do readings for people, I'll say right away, boy, the house you grew up in was like such and such. And sometimes I say it was wonderful, and they go, oh, yeah, how did you know? Or I'll say, oh, my God, it was horrible. I bet, you got the crap beat out of you all the time. How did you know? Well, it's aspects in yogas from the chart that you can see. You can see what your mother and father are like. You can see what the home was like, the upbringing. You can see what your teenage years, what your, whether marriages were hard, relationships. It's amazing how accurate it is. And people think, I'm looking at a crystal ball, and I'm not. I'm looking at a chart with what we call yogas in it. And the interesting thing is, if you take this up to 100,000 feet and you say, well, okay, what is God sitting there just punishing different people and making other people happy? I don't believe that. And what the whole premise of ancient Jyotish astrology was, Jyotisha means the science of the light of the soul. And if you take the possibility that we've lived before and that there is life beyond what we see in this three-dimensional five-sense world, well, now you open up a whole realm of possibilities. And I really believe that's what astrology is showing. It's showing you may have created when you came in here. And that's what I think happens. In fact, it's believed the guardian angel attaches the soul to the embryo at conception. There's some interesting science right now. In fact, doctors are finding, in fact, they've been finding in genetics research, that when a spermatozoid will attach to an embryo or an egg, There is a flash of light. Well, that's an interesting phenomena. And then it's believed that the guardian angel ties the soul into the body at first breath. That's when astrology starts kicking in. That's when the three-dimensional, five-sense paradigm that we call the world happens. It's that first breath. And interestingly enough, most birth charts won't have the first breath. Somebody looks up at the clock, writes down on the clipboard, oh yeah, the so-and-so was born at this time. So the birth charts could be off slightly, and most of them are. And I always try and adjust those when I do readings. But the interesting thing is, why do we come into the situations we do? Our parents, our situations, our relationships, our interactions with our friends. I really think it's an amalgam that we may have picked or created by virtue of the karma we created, what we need to experience, and also free will. And Gandhi might have said it best: when God created the law of karma, you could just sit back and let the souls play.
Interesting. You know, you said something, Jeff, that was so intriguing about the gray matter in our head. You know, a year and a half ago, I became a grandfather for the first time, and
Congratulations.
Thank you. My granddaughter spends about 95% of her life at my home, at our home. Her dad and mom work, and she's there, 5-6 days a week, and it's interesting. Anybody that says, well, there's no soul, there's no energy, there's no nothing. Just look at a little child. Look at a baby.
Magical.
Yeah. It's just amazing, because that personality, that knowledge, that trait, that essence, that being did not come from some gray goo in the skull. It just didn't.
Not a chance.
In what she has learned, just watching this little baby who couldn't do nothing, and now 15 months later can walk, and it's amazing to watch her every day, how she just develops things so quickly. First of all, it was a challenge to even crawl, and then now she can walk, and now she can multitask and walk, and now multitask and talk and walk. And it just grows and grows and grows. And that's not some machine or somebody that's, moving her legs or flashing cards in front of her face or lights.
No, exactly.
I mean, it's just happening on its own. And that's all I could say to that. Is
even genetics alone. I mean, we can study genetics. We can splice and do all that. But you look at genetics of and by itself. I mean, it's one thing to splice a gene. It's one thing to alter it. Try creating it once. I mean,
right.
The dexterity that you pick up a cup of coffee with, there isn't a robot on this planet that can do it quite like that. I mean, in fact, science will say, okay, when you make a motion, the impulse comes from the brain, right? Goes through the gray matter. And of course, they've proven that they can actually touch points in the brain with needles and make the fingers move. But try doing that. And that's one of the most magical things in the universe. When you think about free will going through the human mechanism,
it's amazing,
and then playing out that whole.
Hey Jeff, I'm going to stop you just for a second. We got to take a quick commercial break. All right, everybody, we're back with our good friend Jeff Harman. Jeff, again, thank you so much for giving us time out of your busy weekend and being here.
Well, thanks.
Before we went into the break, you mentioned something which is so true, Jeff, about again that human intuition. They've done what I don't know if you want to call it open brain surgery or testing with probes and with electrical impulses, and they can get different the body to do different things. But like you said, the free will. The connecting it all together, making it all work together, is just, the complexity is mind-boggling.
Oh yeah, it is. It really, really is. I think the thing that I like the most about looking at some of the ancient astrology is you begin to see why we might have the influences on us that we have, and that changes the equation, because what happens you start looking at yourself outside of yourself. And, there's a lot of very interesting paranormal and mystical practices that you can get trained in. Some people know it as astral travel. These kinds of things, in the ancient Hebrew studies, it was called Merkava. The Tibetan Lamas have different versions. Many mystery schools have had it. And essentially, it is taking your consciousness and pouring it into a vessel, if you will. Some people will call that an elemental. And if one practices enough, you can actually go and interact with the three-dimensional physical world in a different location while still lying in a bed. Some people will roll their eyes at that, but that's an absolute fact. And we are taught from the ages of probably school forward not to think. We're taught to learn. Now, I'm not saying you don't think when you learn. What I am saying is we're not taught to think in critical, creative ways. We're more taught to learn something, remember it, and then apply it to something to figure out a problem. That's a whole different type of exercising of the mind, and it actually shuts down the creative elements of it. Or you could say the true, full-blown belief is such a powerful thing. If someone believes they can do something, sooner or later they may be actually able to overcome almost any obstacle and start doing it. And I think we interact with the three-dimensional physical world so much that we know when we hit a wall, well, we know we can't walk through it, right? But if there was more teachings to the fact to where your consciousness rooted down in this three-dimensional five-sense world has to deal with its parameters. Quantum physicists and string theory physicists are playing with a lot of this stuff right now, and we know as far back as early in the 1800s, or late in the 1800s actually, the slit experiment, where it was proven that consciousness can alter things. Dr. Emoto's work is particularly compelling when you see what the diversity of prints he got out of water from people meditating, praying, or sampling water from different places. So there's no question. Yeah, it actually was. It was in 1803. Dr. Young had done a experiment on quantum mechanics and physics where he had shown with the slit experiment, the double slit experiment, it's actually technically called, where it had altered matter. And interestingly enough, that was discovered not too far after the whole Industrial Revolution really started. It was only about 80 up to 100 years before that, about 100 years before that.
It's so amazing, Jeff, that our mind is such I mean, there's so much to it. It's so powerful, and the energy around us. And the thing I think that a lot of people have to deal with, and myself included, and again, I consider people that can look beyond things to be so gifted, but we get hung up in this life, this human life. We get so hung up with having to pay the bills, having to make sure that we have employment so we can keep a roof over our head.
Oh yeah.
It's just amazing how society has really closed in. And in the second hour, we're going to talk about the elections and some of the other things. I'd like to talk a little bit about that and kind of delve into that. But again, society has really put us in a cage. Society's expectations of how you should live and how you should look and how you should think. It really just contains and consumes so many people.
It does, but it's always been that way. A lot of people blame the modern world. That we're so wrapped up in modern technology. That's true. But if you run the clock back and you start looking back at history and looking how boxed in people were, I mean, take people back in Rome or people back in Europe. If you weren't a landowner, you were a farmer, or if you weren't a farmer, you were a merchant. And anything outside of the confines of the local religion or the religious circles that you were in, it was brutal. Nothing was accepted. And we see this today. If you defied the king, you'd be flogged in the square, or you'd have your head chopped off. So, in a lot of ways, we're way better off than we were, but this is an element, a force that keeps acting against human consciousness throughout time. And I think it's really incumbent upon us. We're the only ones who can control what we believe or question what we believe and look into other possibilities. And when people get dogmatic and they don't want to look at any other possible way other than their way, well, then you've got dogma. And it's an interesting look into how we perceive reality. Belief is one of the most interesting things to me, because I see it all the time where one person's belief that something's going to make them happy, and we all are victims of this. We will pursue that with a vengeance, even if it's to our destruction or to our detriment. You see this with substance abuse. You see it with all kinds of things. People think they'll be happier if they pursue that course of action, and then later in life they find that they weren't, or that it was destructive, or it ruins people's lives. And it's a very interesting thing to be, I think, more stoic and more centered in our reaction and beliefs.
Interesting. We got a couple questions that came in. Can we go ahead and post them up to you?
Yeah, sure.
One of our listeners, Don, writes and says, first of all, I am extremely impressed with Jeff's knowledge of astrology around the world. He says, Jeff, are you aware of the 13th house of the zodiac recently discovered? I believe it's called Orpheus.
So, Orphica.
Orphica.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. That's not a house. That's a sign.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of secret zodiacs. One of the things that many of the astronomers they've always scoffed at is that the signs, or you could say the constellations in the heavens, do not line up with the astrological signs. And they're exactly correct. They never did. Yes, there are secret zodiacs that are very, very interesting. In fact, Vedic astrology does not even use the tropical zodiac. It interacts with it. And there's another zodiac, there's a lunar zodiac surrounding the Earth. And I always joke around with the astronomers and say, I don't care how much you polish the lenses on your telescopes, you're not going to see that zodiac either, because it is a spiritual construct. And this is what's really interesting about the Western, and I might also cite the ancient Vedantic scriptures. The scriptures in the Bible actually interact with the zodiac. Not the one the scientists are looking at, but the spiritual matrix of angels. In fact, the Bible has a permutation, well known in Exodus, 3 verses, where the permutations of those 3 verses equal the 72 angels that rule each quintessence. A quintessence is simply 5 degrees. Each 5 degrees around the zodiac. Now, the 13th sign, that's a whole other world there. See, there is secret zodiacs where you can actually use different fixed stars, and they're used for different purposes. And very secret stuff. The Rosicrucians, Dr. Rudd, who wrote a book, and this is a long time ago, this is probably, I think, 12th century, called the Goetia. This all goes back into King Solomon, goes back into Babylonia and Egypt. I personally think we lost so much right at the turn of where we went from BC to, some people call it Common Era, or after death, the whole Christian time there, because really that is a very interesting time. The Second Temple in Israel was destroyed. They said prophecy was not ever going to continue from that point forward. There was something really, really big that all happened there, and there was paranormal phenomena. There we go. That's the words I'm looking for. Where everything had a lot of historical documentation. I personally think the Romans released the demons incarcerated by King Solomon, and there is a lot of very interesting stuff to that. The wings of the wind, which are the angels that rule. There's 12 to the good and 12 to the severity. Again, you can't make this stuff up. It's all in the zodiacs. They are spiritual matrices. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. We're really interacting here in a soul matrix that's, I think, one that we had a big part in playing when we came in. And fascinating stuff. NASA actually puts us going close to 500 million miles an hour around the central sun. I think they've published like around 483,000 miles an hour. And so fast that the planets spiral behind the sun in orbit. So we're like rocketing around this central sun. In fact, it takes somewhere between 24 and 26,000 years to make it all the way around. It's called the Gray Year. The ancient Vedantic scriptures not only cite that, they also cite that there were 250 million-year galactic cycles. And NASA and many science organizations are corroborating that. They're saying this is very likely. The Royal Observatory in England, as well as their branch down in Australia, had done a detailed study of the ancient ephemerises. An ephemeris is a positioning table of the stars and the planets throughout time. And in India, they call it a panchanga. It's the same thing. In fact, when my mom and I were doing charts back in the 70s, we didn't have a computer. We took out an ephemeris and said, okay, where is everything? And I'll put it in the chart, put it in the houses, and that was it. That's how you did astrology. You did it by hand. And today, the computer programs are much more accurate. I mean, they're accurate to literally to the second. But why I'm bringing all this up is because they had done a study to see, were the ancient astrologers just a bunch of wax, or were they really accurate with the positions of the stars and the planets in the heavens? They found that in most cases they were within 30 minutes of arc, not degrees, 30 minutes of arc. And oftentimes much more accurate than that. And that's pretty amazing to have that kind of precision. And I believe it's well known in the inner circles that this stuff was communicated by angels, because there's absolutely no way any human being would be able to empirically observe this, especially if you look at, you've only got so many hours of darkness, right, where you can actually see the heavens. The rest of it's the white sky, it's the sun, right? And then you've got to figure in weather, right? And then also, let's take into account the fact that we're going around the sun, so you can't see the same heavens all the time. So how the heck did they come up with this construct? Well, it's actually in many of the scriptures. The saints and the prophets would call it Merkava in the Aramaic and Hebrew. The Tibetan lamas and the yogis in India would call, they were actually called seers. Rishis were the name that they would call them. And there's no way, if you were able to see some of the stuff that I use in programs now, which is basically the ancient modalities, there's absolutely no way anybody came up with this from empirical observations. Way too complex and way too spiritual.
And that's something that has to be coupled in all the time, because, of course, there's the pure science. And I'm not going to say the debunkers use pure science, but a lot of the scientists, the purists, that's all they look at is, well, we need the facts and the numbers, and that's all it is.
Right, and they want repeatability, which you can't do in astrology.
Right.
Well, you can, but you can't. Here's the biggest thing. If I get somebody who calls me up and says, I can't find my cat, do you think my cat will ever show up? Well, I'll cast a chart for the moment, right? Mm-hmm. So the sixth house is small pets and animals. And I do this a lot, where I've had people have their animals sick. Do you think the animal's going to live? Well, maybe, maybe not. We just look at the chart. And it's giving them insight in homeopathy and maybe that vet isn't the right vet, on and on. Just take that example. Or we've done it with horses. You can do it with anything under the sun. Well, science is going to want to come back and say, can you do that again? No, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't recreate that person's, situation, love affair, pet or whatever again like that. It doesn't happen. So then they'll roll their eyes and walk away. But what's interesting, like Dr. Claude Swanson, who's a very good friend of mine, he wrote the book, The Synchronized Universe, and I think he also wrote another one, I can't remember the title, but excellent books, because he's looking at hard science's need to reevaluate how consciousness and cosmology of consciousness interacts with the universe. It's not repeatable. And that takes me to, that question that gentleman just asked.
Hey, Jeff, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
We've got an NBC news break coming up in about 10 seconds. How about I let you go ahead and take a little breather, get a little something to drink, and we'll pick you up on the other side?
No problem. I've been drinking all the way through. I've got my coffee right here.
Sounds good. Again, Jeff, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend and being with us here tonight.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. No problems.
It's interesting. Before we went into the news break, you mentioned about scientists, how the purists want repeatability. Well, there's really a science, too, when you think about it, the science of things that are not repeatable, like astrology.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's happening. Right now, DNA, they're finding not only receives, but it transmits. And it's actually an interactive switch. In fact, there's certain, Sir Francis Crick, as well as many others who originally, had cracked the whole genetic code. James Watson and Luke Monagers and all that. It was really, I always liked Sir Francis Crick because he got up and I remember that speech I had watched. In fact, you can watch it on the internet, where many people in government and the senators, we're going to know everything. We're going to know why you have blue eye. We're going to know everything. And Sir Francis Crick got up and said, maybe, just maybe, in 1,000 years, we'll really figure out what the heck we did and what we're dealing with here. And, DNA has brought a lot of wonderful things in forensic science, but what's also it's proving is astrology. And the reason it's proving it is there are frequencies in the planets, and they're proving now that it interacts with DNA. Some other real compelling science is you take the Callisto effect, which that was actually done quite a while ago. That was actually done back in the late 40s, 60s, and again in the early 70s, where basically they had taken and looked into planetary configurations and how it affected metals by their congealing. And Mars, of course, rules iron, Jupiter rules tin, and they looked at all these different metals. Sun is the gold. And this kind of gets into some of the older alchemy, too. And people never question, why in the heck did they have a law in England that you couldn't make gold? You don't make laws unless you're trying to stop somebody from doing something. So not to go down that road, but it's interesting how there's a lot of hidden knowledge about these things, and the heavens sure seem to interact with it. And I'm amazed where I'll have people call me up and they will basically tell me I'm crazy when I give them an answer that's not what they want to hear. And like a good example, someone will call me up and say, I'm thinking about, leaving my wife and going off with someone else, and I think she's in love with me, or whatever the situation is. And I'll just tell them what the chart says. I'm not there to give my opinion. I'm there to read the chart. And it actually is a language when you use the ancient system. And if I tell them what they want to hear, and that's what the chart says, they're happy. If I tell them what they don't want to hear, they'll often be very, unreceptive, let's put it that way. And then they'll call me back 2 or 3 weeks later and go, I thought you were crazy, but it's exactly what happened. I said, I know. It's like you can't control someone else's free will. And what it's like is you're looking over the top of the curtain at the interactive free will of egos in play. And that's why I jump back to that statement Gandhi made. There is free will. You can do anything you want here on this physical world. You will get consequences for it. And the interesting thing is, interrogation astrology is probably as close to looking at interactive reality as you can get. It's absolutely amazing.
Without a doubt.
Go ahead.
No, it is. It is. Couple questions I just want to get off to you, and then we want to talk a little bit about presidential elections. I want to talk about some of the things you'd like to cover today. Richard writes in and says, in astrology, wouldn't you get a more accurate reading if you knew the actual time of conception instead of the birth?
Well, the Egyptians actually had a modality to calculate that from the birth chart, and yes, I don't know that you get a more accurate, because, see, time in the reality field that we call reality starts when the soul is tied into the body. So in other words, conception has an effect, a huge effect, but it's believed that the angel is in converse with the consciousness of the soul during the gestation period, whatever that is, which for most women it's 9 months, give or take, and that there's a mark beneath our nose, that little cleft we all have between our nose and our upper lip is the mark that divides us and says to make us forget. Humphrey Bogart said that once in a movie. The movie was Key Largo with, what was his name? Anyways, he told that story to, oh God, there were some great actors in that. I forget his name. Anyways, my mind slipped.
Lauren Bacall was the...
Yeah, Lauren Bacall was in there, and then who was the other guy that played the dad? He was the cantankerous one of the Frank Capra movies. I love him too. He played Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, you're not thinking of Edward G. Robinson.
Well, he was in there too. That's right. Now, he was the bad guy, but no, the guy I'm thinking of played Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. Anyways, he told that story. Humphrey Bogart told that story about the angel making that mark. Well, that's an old legend out of a book called the Sefer Haggadah, which is a verbal legend that has been told throughout history, and it was actually penned in the late 1800s. But I found myself that it's true. And when my son was born, I actually got the privilege to be there holding my wife's hand. And to my amazement, I love telling this story, because to my amazement, she had to go C-section. I actually got to pick the time he was born. We actually picked the conception time for him. And I do this for a lot of people, and sometimes it takes right away. Other times it may take a little time, but you can actually use the woman's chart to conceive. In fact, this is nothing new. I can show you ancient astrology books that would say if you conceive at this time when the signs are this, you will lean towards a masculine child. If you do it this way, you'll lean towards a feminine child. And there were auspicious times, and there were times you wanted to avoid at which to attract the soul. And there were also prayers and meditations that you would do to attract the proper soul. So it's interesting stuff. And when my son was born, we got to pick the time. I got to pick the time he was born, and I actually saw two lights come in. I didn't see any shapes or wings or anything, but the minute he cried, it just illuminated, joined as one, and I went, "Oh my God!" And I walked up. He reached his hands up. The umbilical cord was already cut. He was laying on his back. He reached up and grabbed my thumbs and stopped crying. And they can't see because they put that, silver in their eyes. So it was amazing. I mean, that was probably the most profound experience ever. You know, I always say when they stand me up and say, "What was the best part?" That's probably going to be it.
That's it.
That there forward, it's just amazing. Absolutely.
What I think is more amazing, Jeff, is that you get it. That's the more amazing part.
Well, I think everybody can get it, and there's a lot of people who do, and that's the interesting thing. It's kind of like Jacob's ladder. I see it in astrology. There are many, many people on this planet who are having experiences that are probably commensurate with what they need to have. Whether you agree with them or not, that's going to get into the election here real soon. I mean, we're at a precarious time in history, that's for sure, or certainly a major milestone in history. And this election certainly mirrors that, the dissension that's going on with that.
Oh, it's amazing. Two questions before we get to that. One question is, Carol, actually from your neck of the woods, writes and says, does the star Arcturus play a significant part in astrology?
They all do. That's a great question. Fixed stars, and Arcturus is certainly one of them, play a huge part in ancient astrology. The Egyptians were masters at fixed stars. I actually have translations that date back to well into the 200-300 BC area, certainly 200. And Alexandria, Egypt, was certainly one. One particular, Ptolemy is one Egyptian that most astrologers run into sooner or later, and many of his translations have been done by different people. There was another Egyptian king called Dorotheus. There were many Hellenistic Greeks. The Indians, again, a lot of fixed stars. Yes, fixed stars are called secret helpers or secret hinderers. And it's interesting she brings up fixed stars because it's believed by the ancients that there were angels associated with these that influenced the soul. And what's fascinating about these were used a lot in coronation times. They were also used a lot in the cornerstone laying of foundations in cities. I have a lot of clients who have me pick times for them to break ground when they will start a particular spiritual organization or a home or what have you. And the contractors often don't know why they went out there with the backhoe and started digging at this time. You know, the owner says, well, I want you to start digging at this time. Can you do that? And then they'll do it. So, you know, there's actually a mural with George Washington in his Masonic apron and his assistants. They were laying the cornerstone of the Egyptian temple known as the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Anyone who thinks that Washington, D.C. is not an Egyptian temple, just take a little look into it. It's actually called the District of Columbia. It's not even in the United States.
That's true.
And the French architect who laid it out was some very interesting geometry in that. And I think it's safe to say that the little town of Washington has had quite an influence over the world for the last couple hundred years.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. One last question before we go on to the next round or some other things we want to talk about. Gino from New York City writes in and says, Jeff, are dreams an alternate reality?
Boy, that's a good one. I don't have a snappy answer to that. What I will say is that dreams seem to be really an interesting area of study. There are those who believe that every night, and I'm one of them, every night when we go to sleep, consciousness, via the silver cord, if you will, goes out of the body and drifts around and kerbumps into something called elementals. Elementals are all about us. And it's interesting, the soul seems to be very protected for most of us. The few who play around with magic, I think, cross that boundary when they start doing ritual magic, which is exceedingly dangerous. And that's why I think the religions were correct to shun that, because it's very, very dangerous. But most of us are very protected from quote-unquote evil entities for the most part. And dreams seem to be a very complex amalgam of bumping into just random stuff versus also if you take time out of the equation. In fact, remote viewing is an example of transcending time, though they have a problem sometimes hitting the wall with that. But there is no time. I mean, if you really look at, what is a day? A day is measured by the rotation of the Earth around on its axis, which is sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight. That's a day. Back to sunrise again. And if you were to take that reality out of the equation, what is time? Physics can concur with that, and there's many physicists who talk about that. Our time is relative to our perception of reality and where we're at. And dreams transcend that. And I think what's interesting about dreams is interrogations. Like, I've had a lot of folks call me up and say, hey, I've had a dream, and I'll cast a chart called an interrogation. Well, the ninth house in ancient astrology was the dream. So you look at the Lord of the ninth, meaning the planet ruling the ninth house, And you have to use ancient astrology, not modern astrology, rulerships. And then you look at what is it doing to the ruler of the ascendant. Because some people have had dreams that have come true. I'm certainly one of them. I remember when I was a little child, I had 2 guinea pigs, and I think I was probably about 8 years old. And I dreamed that one of them had died and was lying on his side, a little gray guinea pig. And sure enough, I jump out of bed, I run downstairs, and there it was laying exactly like that. I remember I was crying. My mom says, "Oh, it's okay. Animals die, and we buried the little guinea pig and said a prayer." But it was amazing. And I've had a lot of premonitions and dreams. Many psychics are very, very accurate. Some of them aren't, but a lot of them really, really are. I've got a lot of friends and clients who are psychics, and I'm amazed at how accurate they can be sometimes. And that all falls into that realm of dreams. Again, it's how do we separate from the wheat and the chaff to what is real and what isn't. And it's interesting because the astral plane is actually divided into many different dimensions. In fact, there's an old saying, there's 7 halls of heaven. Well, there may be 7 times 7, 49 dimensions in there. And when we get into the ancient division, one place that I think is very accurate in this is the ancient Kabbalistic models. Like we're in what we call the dimension of Asaya in Aramaic or Hebrew, which is the dimension of solidification. And then there's the Yetziratic plane beyond that. So, and all of these have many dimensions. Quantum physicists are actually conceding to this. And as you go up higher and higher into the next dimension, which is Braya, which is really, really high, the one that's the highest is called Azalut. And there's the seraphims, the cherubims, and the thrones. And those are believed to surround God, particularly the seraphims. And they're depicted in many different scriptures. But what's interesting is quantum physicists are saying something is holding all of this together. I mean, if you look at an atom, what's the difference between a molecule of dust versus gold versus plastic versus the air molecules we're hearing with right now, or the electrons vibrating the airwaves, or the wires that we're speaking over? All interesting stuff, because it's really just energy transmission. I guarantee you the electron that's leaving, or the air molecule leaving my voice right now, is not the one getting to your ears right now. You see, so it's a magical little energetic place. And what's interesting is there's numerology comes into this. And I have a fascinating couple of texts that I've been studying lately that are really incredible. They talk, and this ties very close into dreams and all these perceptions of reality. It talks about the angels chant a permutation of God's name 10,800 times per hour. Now, if you do the math on that, at first I read that and I'm like, how could that be? And then I'm looking into some of the Vedantic doctrines where 108 and then 10,800, all these different numerological things that add up numerologically to 9. And 9 is spiritual completion in the physical plane. What they're saying, and this is what some of the newer leading edge physicists are saying, reality is recreated constantly. Now, we look around, we go, oh, wait a minute, my clothes are still dirty, the tires on the car are worn out, I still got to brush my teeth. So how could that be? But if you think about it, and you said it best just a little while ago, look at your I defy anyone to take a picture of a baby or of yourself, or just look back in time. Photographs do this for us. Movies do this for us, where you can never have that happen again, ever.
Right.
Ever. It's never going to happen again. You see, reality and time, there was a Steven Spielberg movie called AI, and there was one scene in there I really liked. This little robot, if you remember Jude Law,
Yes.
This little robot, there was a cataclysm. And basically, humanity had been destroyed, and all of New York was under the water. And this little robot came back to life. His batteries came on or something, and he said to the angel, he said, can you bring my human friends back? And the angel said, no. And he said, well, you're an angel, can't you do that? Or I think it was an alien or an angel or whatever. And the angel or alien said something profound. It says, we can't do that. Only God can do that. We can show you a hologram and recreate it for a few minutes, but that's never going to be what it was. And if you look at a picture, genetics is one thing, but I defy any smartass in Harvard or any other place to come up with a way to create reality where it is from a conceived point, like a seed with all the genetic codes within it, and then it unfolds, grows, is ensouled, and then ages and then dies. I mean, that's pretty profound, and only life does that. Only living things do that. I mean, and that's magical. I mean, if anybody wants magic, that's it, right there. That's divine magic happening in front of us every second. I mean, and I really believe this book is true in these, because I've seen this now in several places. And when you get into conversations with very knowledgeable physicists, it's really plausible that reality never is repeated.
Interesting, very interesting.
Oh, it's profound.
One other question that came in is, it says, Jeff, do you know if angels are marked near one of their eyes when in human form, and would this be a name in angelic script?
Wow. No, I do not, and that's one I can't really answer to. That's an interesting question. No, I don't have an answer to that. I think angels are an enigma. There's so many of them. I love angels. I study angels and spirits and demons a lot because that's a very interesting subject to me. They are not made of the stuff we are. Some people call it etheric matter. It's a vibration and substance that's not physical. And that gets into the whole realm of consciousness and that whole cosmology of things. And what's interesting is I know how to calculate people's guardian angels. I do a lot of work with talismans for gemstones. One of the things I love about Vedic astrology is it prescribes specific stones you should wear and others you should avoid. And they're totally different for everyone. And there are certain ones you should wear certain times throughout your life. There's certain ones you should always wear, and there's certain ones you should always avoid. And there's certain times you can wear certain ones that you may have to avoid at other times. So it's really an interesting science. And one of the things I do is calculate a person's guardian angel from their birth chart. And that's done, it's a very ancient method, it's not one I came up with. It's done through the Hebrew or Aramaic language. And I don't know how to do it in Sanskrit, but I've heard that it can be done. And I haven't met anyone yet who knows how to do it. A lot of the teachers that I had worked with are now long gone. They're passed away. But fascinating, interesting stuff. It's believed the first hierarchy is the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones. And the thrones are a very special class of angels that are believed to bring us souls down into creation. And it's believed that all human souls are from a very, very high place. And even though we sometimes feel like we're not from a high place and down here in the bill-paying tit-for-tat, eye-for-eye world,
right.
But we are. And there are some people who believe there are people without souls, and that may be true, but there's also a lot of stuff going on with souls, and there's many divisions of classes of souls. It's really interesting stuff. You get smatterings of that stuff in the Psalms, where it'll say son of Adam, son of man. The interesting stuff. C.S. Lewis had some interesting little innuendos in the Chronicles of Narnia, even though it was a child movie. So there's some interesting stuff in there. C.S. Lewis was an interesting guy. I always liked his stuff. But back to the angel thing, I don't have a snappy answer to that one. I do know that there is so many classes of angels, and when you get into the ancient Hebrew and Aramaic, see, one of the problems I had with the Vulgate Latin translations, we lost so much there because you can't, again, take a cryptic coded language and throw it into another language and expect to maintain its codes. Can't happen. And if it does, I sure don't know how it's done, because I've never heard anyone, if somebody knows how, let me know. But I do know I have the codexes and the ciphers, and this is stuff that was well known and is still well known. There's Gematria, Tamira, there's Notricon. These are all numerological and coded references. There's Akbeker. These are things I know. I have them on the shelf. People like Francis Bacon and many others were known to have done this. And what's interesting is there's codes when you go into the old Psalms where God was called many different attributes, and there's one called Elohim, Elohai, Eloheinu. These are all things you can't get unless you go back to the original scripture. Now, if you read that in English, it'll just say God, 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 or the attributes of God. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you lose the significance. And why that's critical is this gets into the whole paranormal realm, that only God was called Elokai, which was the creator of all things, and then Elohim, and were any class of spirits beneath, and there were secrets upon secrets upon secrets in that. And like you take Psalm 91, which is an exceedingly powerful psalm. I would tell anybody who wants to clear their home, read Psalm 91 and put the 4 archangels around you before you go to sleep. That one, in English, it comes through clear as a bell how powerful that one is. And it has an exceedingly powerful cleansing effect. But if you looked at that in its cryptology, I mean, I can show you books, and it's not my genius. It was there way before I was around, and thousands of years ago. The cryptology in that is breathtaking. And again, I'm really disappointed that I don't see any of this out there. Oh, the Bible, and they show the printing presses, and they never get into this stuff.
Right. Well, it's again the study. Well, maybe not the study, but the understanding of interpretation and how things get lost in interpretation, and in some things you can't interpret. You can't not interpretation. I'm sorry, translation. That are just not designed to be translated, because the whole meaning is in what it was originally written and put together in.
Well, especially when it's cryptographic. In other words, what a cipher is. Here's a good example. If you take a verse, okay, in a particular, and this is something I know. I have a book called the Shemush Tehillim. I have many other ones. These are sections of the Bible. Shemush Tehillim is the Psalms. If you look inside of that, there are codes and ciphers that equal certain things. When you use a cipher, simply is a key code where you pass a word through it and it drops through this cipher and you will get a different word out of it. See, you'll get an angel out of it. You'll get a different meaning out of it. And this stuff has been long lost in its entirety, but boy, what we have is breathtaking. It's amazing. And it shows that there's no way anyone. I have one book. It's called the Sefer Ratziel, which is Sefer means book, and Ratziel is the archangel Ratziel, and it's believed that was given by God to Adam when he crashed out of the Garden of Eden, or crashed into this physical reality. And the archangel Raphael, or Ratziel, which means wisdom, by the way. And I have several translations of this book. It's astounding. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It shows where you have angels that rule from sunrise to noon, from noon to sunset, from sunset to midnight, from midnight to sunrise. And all the different classes of angels that take over as the moon moves into different degrees and signs and phases. I mean, you just cannot make this stuff up. Sure. This is profound stuff, way beyond what anyone's going to come up with a vivid imagination.
Interesting stuff, man.
Yeah, it is.
Mind-blowing, actually.
Yeah, and see, that's what's been lost. And I don't claim to have all this put together, but I have enough put together to be completely dangerous, where you can look at the whole system of astrology and you go, wait a minute, this is, we're looking at a soul here unfolding in a point in time. And that soul's experience is going to be complete. There's no two charts the same.
Right.
Can't happen. The lady who asked before about fixed stars, if what I said earlier, if our solar system is rocketing around a central sun at about 480,000 miles an hour, do you think we could ever get the same chart again?
Never.
When it does it once in 24 or 26,000 years.
Right.
You got 10 numbers on a telephone, omitting the star and the pound. You can call everybody on the planet. In astrology, you have thousands of fixed stars. You have the lunar mansion. You have 12 signs, 12 signs, 12 houses, 12 terrestrial houses. And then you have 360 degrees and an infinite, literally infinite geometrical configuration of orbiting bodies. You could never get the same chart twice. And that's why I laugh at these sun sign books. It's like, go look in somebody's eyes who's a Pisces, and then go look at another Pisces' eyes. It ain't the same person. That's why I call it love, light, and cluelessness.
Well, when we pass over, when we move out of the human realm, Jeff, and get to the other side, I'm hoping that, I don't know if you want to call it hope, but when you look at it all or you look back, you go, yeah, now I understand how this all works and how it all comes together.
Yeah, we all pray for that aha moment, no doubt.
Because maybe you knew all along, but you had to experience things here on Earth. Speaking of things here on Earth, the presidential election, everything that's coming up.
Yeah.
Let's we've got about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Let's. It's crazy. I think it's the first time we ever saw this much rock throwing and.
Well, that's true, and it's not. I mean, you look back at the Civil War. You look back at some of the stuff that's going on here in the '60s, and look at some of the union wars. I mean, look at the studios here in Hollywood. They had people beating each over the heads with clubs, over scab workers.
True.
I mean, the human race gets pretty nuts when it comes down to opinions and beliefs, and we're in one of those. I think why it's so crazy right now, we are experiencing the final Jupiter-Saturn square before one of the most significant times in the last 240 years. Everyone has asked me if I can, not that I claim to know everything, but one of the things I love is ancient astrology has something called the revolutions of the world. And the last time we had a major, what we call mutation conjunction like this, was 1702. That was the commencement of the Industrial Revolution. Anybody look it up? Steam was invented shortly thereafter. Mass production started coming in. Of course, we know Benjamin Franklin, electricity, and on and on. And then by the 1800s, we're throwing railroad tracks across the United States and Europe and other places, and we have been on a ramped escalation of technology ever since. Well, the next astrological indicator, these come about every 240 years approximately. The next one is the winter solstice of 2020. Well, that's the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction now commencing in an air sign. And what's interesting is a lot of people have asked me, what do you think of the Mayan calendar? What do you think of this and that? And I couldn't come up with anything major, but I do now. The whole era of 2001, the 9/11 and the Iraqi war and all that came about with a Saturn-Pluto opposition. Then we had the square, brought the crash of 08 and 09, and had the Fed not bailed the Western banking system out, and the bankers began to see it, I think we would have had a crash probably worse than 1929. And now whoever gets in the White House the next election, I think is going to have to contend with some serious stuff, because we have between late 2018 and 2020, we have again a major astrological energy or chapter in society ending and a new one beginning. And the question's going to be, how will it end and how will it begin? And I'm not saying that on 2020, we're all going to see this great shining light out of the sky. We see it every day. It's called the sun. But I would tell you that I think it's the commencement of a new era, and one that's going to be exceedingly high-tech, but it's going to require us also, the whole financial worlds are kind of on a collision course like a freight train. If you look at the Western banking system with its colossal derivative markets right now, stacking way past the ceiling. And then you look at the BRICS nations polarizing, China and Russia, and China is very tied in with the United States, and which relates to this election, because people feel it. It's not just the candidates, but they're feeling it. And right now, as we speak, we are experiencing a Jupiter-Saturn square. That's the final hurrah before they go to the conjunction about 4 years from now. See? So what's interesting is these happen every 20 years, but only happen once every 240 years, where they move into new elements like the earth, air, fire, and water of the class that this one is. It's too much to get into on a radio show, but interesting stuff. And when I look at the candidates, nobody's happy with anybody.
Right.
I mean, they're not. Everybody hates Hillary. They hate Donald Trump. And, when I look at their charts, they're spot on. When I look at Donald Trump's chart, for instance, in Vedic astrology, and I get a lot of heat for this because people think I'm favoring him. Well, here's the interesting thing. I'm not looking at any of the candidates, and you mentioned this earlier. Does ego get in the way? Sure it does, but I try and take my ego out of it. I look at Sanders, Clinton, and Trump, the only ones left standing. Trump has the most strong chart. Trump has, like him or dislike him, he has defied political gravity. Nobody out there, everyone's tried to knock him off the game. They've tried to knock him out. They've tried to discredit him, and he keeps on going. And he's gaining momentum. The astrology says he's like win. Now, with that, Hillary, very strong contender. This race is going to be close, and it's tough to call. Hillary, I hate to say it, I'm not here to bash her, but if you took the names off these charts, she has some really malefic stuff in her 10th house of career. And it's safe to say most people don't trust her. And she's done some very questionable things in the past, with her husband and other things, and yet it keeps being whitewashed. I'm of the camp with George Carlin, you have owners. I don't think presidents really run this country. I think the owners do, and the presidents do what they're told to do, or they get a JFK haircut. And the last two who tried to do something, Lincoln and Kennedy, ended up in a box. But I think, this is going to be a really close election. Hillary, by all standards, when I looked at all of her astrology, she's got some tough stuff going on right now. She has some very nasty progressions. She's not in a strong place. Bernie Sanders, I'm not, I will, say I'm not for what he stands for. But if I had to just look at the guy's chart, he's a lot more trustworthy than Hillary.
Right.
Though I don't know if I agree with
in a pool of sharks. Yes.
Yeah, in a pool of sharks, right. And I would say, if you took the names off these and you just said, okay, what about this person? Bernie comes up, at least a pretty reasonable and good guy. Hillary comes up like, wow, I don't think I'd trust her farther than I could pick her up and physically throw her. She has a debilitated Mars in the 10th house with Saturn, plain English. Whew, that one will do whatever that one can do. Trump comes off like the very pushy and self-aggrandizing guy that he is, but he also comes off, and I'm not, again, favoring any one of these candidates, he comes off actually a lot smarter than people give him credit for. I think why he's so abrasive is he has Mars right in the ascendant, and it's a very powerful Mars. But he's kind of like General Patton in a way. But I would say he has more finesse, even though a lot of people would not agree with that. And again, a lot of people say, oh, what are you, a Republican? No, I'm not. I'm just reading the astrology because I've gotten a lot of flack for this election. If I say anything good about any of the candidates, Trump especially, they all think I'm Republican. I'm just being an astrologer here. And I would say nobody's going to be happy with this election because we're at a time in history where you're not going to, people are, it's almost like a revolutionary war energy. It's really, really intense. And I think it's going to continue to be intense for the next probably decade. But the next 4 or 5 years shows where it really peaks out. Whoever's in there is going to have to contend with this. It's likely to be Trump from what I can see. Though I think the owners want Hillary in, and I think they're going to whitewash her, though her chart keeps saying she's going to go down. But I when I hear some of the folks behind the scenes who are really backing her, the owners are backing her. Yeah. And I think the only chance Trump has is that he's so strong astrologically, the people, which really don't run this country, are going to try and run this country, and that's going to be why he's becoming like an icon, almost like the Beatles were, for a new change. The pendulum always swings. I have a theory that this whole, everybody talks about the Iran deal as being bad. I think the owners are funding a new cataclysm that's coming our way. It's kind of like how Hitler got funded and Japan got funded, and then all of a sudden we had a magical war right after the crash about 5 to 7 years earlier in 1929. We may be, and I hope that doesn't happen because this isn't the same world that it was in the last century. No. We have, I've heard clients who I have that are in much more knowledgeable places about the military than I am, who have said that we may have stuck trillions into black ops operations. But it's interesting, why would you give someone like Iran $150 billion? Mm-hmm. I mean, and no one really questions that. And then I look at the astrology and I go, well, wait a minute, we're on a collision course here. And, there's an old saying, it's prosperity, recession, depression, and war. And the old paradigm was that, Rockefeller said it many times, I make more in one day of war than I do in a year of peace.
Right.
And let the cannon fodder be the young men and women that have no stake in the game. Again, to quote George Carlin, he said, war is when old men in business suits send young men off to war to fight for their business interests.
That's true.
And there may be something to that. Huh?
Well, and it's interesting, Jeff, without getting into a deep discussion of politics, because everybody has a different idea.
Insane right now. Yeah.
Sure, they have a different thing. Yeah. But one thing I really agree with you is that I think in general, it's going to be it's going to take, people talk about what's it going to take to bring change, and what it's going to take is time, and a long time. We've from the elections of the 50s, 40s, 60s, we didn't have the social media, we didn't have the mega news outlets where everybody's throwing their own twist on, and it's like, it's hard to get the truth because there's so many of them out there. Accountability is tough, but I tend to believe, and at the end of the day, I don't know who the best candidate is. But I think people are ready for a change, and without a doubt, to coin the phrase, Trump has kind of poked the turd, if you will. He's saying things that are, that people have never heard before. Yes, it's causing...
He's really got a powerful chart. Like him or dislike him. This guy, I'm telling you, he has something called a Raj Yoga in the 10th house. And there are some people who love him, and there's some people who absolutely hate him.
Right.
And I've had people get mad at me. How can you say that? What, do you like him? I say, no, I'm looking at the chart. This guy, I don't care. Again, when I look at this chart, Trump has the classic king chart. It's the Lord of the Ascendant in the 10th, aspected by Jupiter. And he does. I'm not here promoting the guy. I'm saying this is what his chart says.
Yeah, this is what it is.
That's what it is,
right.
Okay?
Like it or not,
like it or not, this is where it's at. We've had some idiots running this country in the past. And what I think we have to remember, the one thing I'll say about Trump in his chart, he's likely to instill a sense of nationalism and pride in the country, even though there's going to be a lot of people that are going to hate him, that other candidates wouldn't do. Hillary scares the hell out of me, not because of what I'm hearing her say, though that scares me too, but it's what I see in her chart. She has to quote the Egyptians used to do an astrology that's much, much different than what modern astrologers do. It's called primary directions. Primary directions take the essential latitude of where you're born. When I say essential, that's the rotation of the Earth at the latitude someone's born, which is different in speed because the Earth is a ball, right? And each sign that you're born in does not ascend at the same what we call essential rate. So some are called crooked and some are called straight signs. And somebody's going to ask me if Hillary's born in a crooked sign. No, I would say she is crooked. But anyhow, and that's because she's got Mars in the 10th house. Anyways, Hillary has a primary directed Saturn conjuncting the sun. Now, you don't need to know much about astrology to know that that don't sound good.
No, it does
and
not.
And it's going to happen, give or take. We don't know her birth time's exact, but that's on the radar screen for her. I'll just say that within the next year and a half.
Let me ask you
this. Trump, for the first time in his life, has the primary directed sun conjuncting the ascendant, and he hits a 16-year Jupiter period coming right up this October. It doesn't sound like a guy who's going to lose.
Right. Well, and you know the other thing that I find interesting, and one thing, what I've always said about this program is I never delved into politics, and I don't want to do that. Because we hear enough of it. I mean, it's just after a while, it's like, all right, enough's enough. But I will throw this out there. This is my one little rebuttal I'm going to throw out. When you do talk about Hillary Clinton, just remember what she's going to drag in with her as well. That's something we don't hear much about, but, Bill will come right in. So you can take that for what it's worth,
Well, what'll come in, though, is the owners behind her. There's regimes that back these candidates. It takes a lot of money. And she, there's a lot of folks who know there are certain banking factions and certain power plays that are backing certain clients. And I can tell you the regime backing her is significantly different than the one that's going to slide in behind Trump and already is behind Trump. I don't think the owners care who's in the White House as long as they do what they're supposed to do. Obama is an enigma. One of the things that astrology, it was so weird that last election. I couldn't call it because it didn't look like anybody was going to win. But then when I look at it in retrospect, I think Romney was told to lay down, roll over. Now, I know that'll make a lot of people mad. And he did. And Obama was just put back in. When you look at the inauguration day of the presidential elections, these are very interesting because the inauguration days are set. They're not, so is the election day. Well, the inauguration day of Obama's first term, which again was way back in 2009, right? The moon was void of course, in a debilitated state, which in plain English, nothing happens. And if you look back at the last 8 years, obviously, yes, a lot's happened, but nothing significant has happened that's brought advancement. In fact, the military's been declined. The debt deficit has shot to the moon. The healthcare debacle, no matter how you cut it, no matter how they smooth it over, I don't know about your healthcare, but mine's gone way up, and the coverage hasn't. And most people I talked to said that. So that was very fitting in the astrology. Well, the interesting thing is one of the other things that showed Obama winning in his second term is if you take the inauguration day and you drop the candidate's chart on it at the moment in time they're sworn in. Most inaugurations are held right at noon on January 20th. It's just the way it is. And that's an old Masonic thing. The reason they did that is because the sun was at noon. The sun is general significator of the leader. So that's an old carryover. That's why they do that. Well, the next inauguration day, when I drop Hillary's chart on the next inauguration day upcoming here, which is going to be this January of 2017, her descendant is on the Washington, D.C. ascendant, which means not likely she wins. When I drop Trump's on it, his midheaven is on the Washington, D.C. ascendant, which means that's his career. So even though you may like him or dislike him, the astrology points towards, he wins.
Gotcha. Jeff, the 2 hours went way too fast, and I'm hoping we can get you back on sooner than later. It was such an honor to have you here tonight. I can't believe we blew through 2 hours too quick. I want to thank you and Camille for getting this together for us tonight. Again, Jeff Harman's our guest. Go check his website at jeffharman.com. Let's stay in touch. Let's get you back on here in the fall.
Okay. Well, we'll see where everything shakes out.
Sounds good, my friend. Take care. God bless. Have a great weekend.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. Good night.